going to move on to, as I mentioned, I did a virtual road trip in January where I basically, myself and Ashley, our Launchpad fellow for chapter support, we got on the line with every single chapter, which was very exciting, every single active chapter at the time. And so I just wanted to quickly go through, there's a report that's going to be coming out from that, but just talk through some themes that we've heard in terms of chapter development, and a lot of them I think were echoed in the roll call. Actually, this one probably was not echoed in the roll call, because in the roll call we talked about all the things that we're really excited about and some highlights from the past year, but I also thought it was important to pull out some things that you're sharing, that are being shared in terms of the experience that your fellow chapter members or chapter leaders are having. So one of the greatest parts about the virtual road trip was that, whenever I sort of reported out about something like, oh, that a lot of other chapters are struggling with this, one of the continuous pieces of feedback that I got was, oh, we didn't know that other chapters had that problem. And I had to explain, that's because you don't post on Facebook when half your board leaves unexpectedly. That's how you guys are playing out by each other. So I'm here to spread the message that a lot of you are experiencing this phenomenon of, in terms of your activity, peaks and valleys, which is normal, right? So every chapter goes through these phases where you're humming along, you're having three events a month, and then all of a sudden you decide that you want to stop and apply for your 501c3, or half the board leaves, and then there's just no activity for 4 months, right? And so, because you guys don't have to look around, because that happened to any other chapter here where you just had to slow down on activity. Only in Grand Rapids. Yes, okay. So we know that this happens, right? We were hearing this from a lot of chapters. And a lot of what we're talking about, this second phenomenon of bursting out the gate. You get all this new energy onto the board, you have your first sort of official board come on, or you start a volunteer report, and then all of a sudden you're wanting to do 10 programs a month, and then you realize that that is actually not sustainable. And so a lot of what we heard from the chapters was, how do we establish pipelines for chapter leadership that basically help to either mitigate or account for these peaks and valleys, or keep us from this sort of, we're bursting out the gate and then we're not able to sustain this level of activity. And so a lot of you all are talking about your internal structure and what that structure is that best supports sustained activity, having your members, having your local communities really be able to depend on YNPN as a continued resource, a go-to in their communities. And so these pipelines, they look a little different for each group. We heard YNPN San Francisco, for example, talk about this, governing volunteer core structure. We have folks that are still sort of in a steering committee phase. Basically, what we were hearing is that there's generally been this understanding that the pipeline for establishing strong leaders at the chapter level is to create sort of like a ladder of engagement for your members, right? So some clear places where people can start to volunteer with you, whether that's through a core or serving on a committee, and then transitioning into some sort of board leadership, right? And so that's something that we heard from a lot of the chapters, and is definitely becoming sort of a built-in part of the way that chapters are thinking about sustaining themselves in terms of activity and in terms of their reaching their strategic goals. So there was this theme around diversity that kept coming up also. So it was probably one of the most exciting things that I was hearing from chapters. I would say, I've been with the network for 9 years. There was a point where this wasn't on the docket at all. Even I think amongst this group that tends to be very forward-thinking and progressive in terms of how important it is to have an inclusive network. But one of the things that I was really excited to hear about is that this isn't a question for our chapters, that it's important to have diverse membership, it's important to have diverse boards. So what I was hearing was, we set this as a goal, we set this as a priority, we know that, but what a lot of chapters are struggling with is the how. So how do you create events that are reflective of the wider community, that have the diversity, even if the community is not very diverse, are clearly accessible and inclusive for the different people that work in the sector locally, and then how do you make sure that your board also reflects that diversity, right? And so I mean, we can look around and see that that's something that we obviously prioritize at the national level as well. We probably could do some work around, and so it's something that the chapter level folks are also really trying to figure out. So in terms of support and programming and places where we can have some group conversations, this definitely feels like a direction that folks want to go in, which is great. Membership, another theme that came up. I'm going to skip it. You heard what I said. A lot of people are just trying to figure it out. What does membership look like? Is it paid? Is it not paid? How do you define it? We're all trying to figure this out, right? And so it's a conversation that's happening at the local level. It's obviously a conversation that's happening at the national level, and it's something that we're going to continue to work through together going forward. Another exciting thing that I started to hear was this role of YNPN chapters as a community-wide convener, right? So for a long time, we were the folks that provided services for young people who had gaps in skills or who were looking for access to networks. From what we've been hearing, a lot of the chapters are really starting to be seen as not just the people that are providing services for young people, but this sort of neutral convener in the local community. So, for example, I saw this when I was in Grand Rapids last year for the Rhyme and Rumble. It wasn't just sort of the young people serving groups or the other young professional organizations that were coming together for that event. It was the local United Way, it was the local Red Cross, it was these established organizations who really have no other reason for being together except for when YNPN calls them together. I've heard similar stories in San Diego, I hear similar stories in Southern Nevada, and that to me is extremely exciting, that our reach and our influence is going beyond just the folks that we serve as part of our core mission. And lastly, one of the themes that I heard was that that we're all trying to figure out, all of you are trying to figure out what's next in terms of growth. So for our startup and emerging chapters, a lot of you are thinking about what is that first board transition going to look like, moving into established leadership. And then we have some of our more established chapters who are considering paid staff of their own. And what does that look like? But I think that one of the questions that fortunately folks are really asking is not just sort of, this is the next step. Well, we know that we were a steering committee, now we have to move towards the board, but are really trying to tie those conversations around what are the actual goals that we have set forth. And will becoming an established board serve that well? Will hiring the staff serve that well? As opposed to, I think, what we see in terms of a lot of organizations, which is, this is just what we know in terms of structure, so we're going to move into that because that's what we're supposed to do. I think people are asking really good questions about how to best facilitate growth. So those are some big themes, and all of these slides will be available to you guys after the conference.